Help me welcome our next guest to the show, Andrew Huff. Andrew, my man, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Oh, man, I am so excited to have you here. You're doing amazing things in the world. But before we get into it, Andrew, for everyone tuning in for the first time, want to let them know that we are highlighting remarkable people that are making remarkable impact. And so let's kick off the conversation, Andrew. Who are you? Where are you living in the world? Let's get to know you a little bit.
Oh my God, that's a crazy long conversation with a lot of backstory. So how did I get to where I am today? So let's go back to my freshman year of college. First day or second day of school, 9/11 happened. That convinced me to join the military with a bunch of my friends, and I ended up serving 2 combat tours as an infantryman in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Had the desire to be a career officer at that point. And then I got wounded on my second tour, and I'm like, nah, I don't want to be, in the infantry the rest of my life. I sort of got that out of my system. And the wars were becoming unpopular, and I sort of thought we were losing direction with what was going on. I went back to my true passion, which is science. So finished up a degree in psychological research. Thought I was going to become a psychologist, got accepted to a couple schools. Hated clinical outpatient work. So I was working for the Department of Veterans Affairs, actually managing mental health outpatient care, and I just didn't like it. So I had one of those moments like, what do I do next? So I did the shotgun approach. I took the LSAT, applied to law school, I applied to medical school, I applied to an engineering program, and I wasn't too fond of the law school gig. So I was, interesting side note. So to figure out whether or not I wanted to be a lawyer, I actually was a clerk for the Minnesota Administrative Court. And it seemed very repetitious. I didn't like it. I'm like, oh crap, what am I gonna do? So to buy time, the economy was tanking. I went and got a master's degree in engineering. Coming out of the program, once again, I didn't know what to do. I was actually set on going to work in corporate America. I had a couple job offers from a couple large multinational companies. And I did the defense of my thesis, and my graduate committee was like, hey, you should really go get a PhD. I'm like, okay, I'll entertain the idea. PhD in what? They're like, public health. I'm like, public health? I'm like, what do I know about public health? And how many credits is this going to be? And they're like, well, go meet with this guy named Dr. Jeff Bender. He'll be one of your primary or co-advisors, and he'll fill you in on it. So I went and met with Dr. Bender, and he told me about the deal. So basically, there was this national security problem that the Department of Homeland Security wanted help with in food and agriculture related to bioterrorism, biosecurity. So that actually played in really well with my military background, my military experience. I had a security clearance, all that stuff. Yep. And they had a data set that wanted me to work with. So I did a lot of high performance computing in my master's degree. So really, this was a lot of things sort of coming together. And then I just had to get through the school part. So environmental health science, epidemiology, biostatistics. And I cranked through it as fast as I could. I sort of did it in record time. I finished the PhD in 2.5 years, which is sort of not heard of. It's possible. So I just started doing my research on day one, doing all my coursework on day one, just detached from my family and friends for 3 years. I didn't really see anyone. Finished and presented my research all over Washington, D.C. I really had a lot of interesting, findings. And at one of these presentations, at one of these government committees, I was approached by Sandia National Laboratories, which is a federally funded research and development center. It's most famous for weapons, nuclear weapons. They do the engineering on nuclear weapons. I wasn't involved in that kind of work, but that's the nature of stuff going on there. So they wanted to bring me in as a scientist or engineer on these national security issues. I jumped on that. I took that position. And a year after working there, I was hating it. So all my work was getting classified. I couldn't talk about anything I was doing. And as a scientist, unless you're going to stay in that classified environment your whole life, it's really, you have to make a decision young, like either you're going to stay there your whole life or you're going to get out, because you have nothing to talk about after, 5-10 years of working there. You imagine being a seasoned scientist and going into an interview somewhere else, and you can't really talk about what you're doing. So
quick sidebar question for you real quick. How much of it is really classified? How much of your work or science work that takes place there is happening that we as the layman don't know about?
Quite a bit. I can't even talk about probably what the percentages of what my work was classified, but I can say, a large portion of it was. And then there's always stuff on the gray area. So if you're you're a scientist, and if you look at the reason why classification was created, this whole secrecy system in the United States was to keep scientific and engineering research out of enemy hands, right? So that was like the Manhattan Project. That's really what it was at its foundation. It's still there today. So what happened is, if you're doing research on things and you're learning, you're figuring things out, it might not be classified yet, but that doesn't mean you can talk about it either. So there's a lot of gray area. And then it goes through this person called a derivative classifier, which is a government person, which says, tries to figure out what should be classified or not. And it's a political process, or not political, but it's an administrative process. And there's a lot of classified research going on in the United States. I mean, there's quite a bit. The funny thing about it though is, once you're on the other side and you get to start seeing something that's labeled secret or top secret, you're like, well, I could have Googled that, and that's a secret. so sometimes everything that the government stamps secret on is not really, some critical piece of information. It's just that someone thought it would be, a jeopardy to the United States if that information leaked out. So not everything that you see is like some crazy thing. And sometimes there are some really crazy information. Sometimes I think the more interesting information you could get your hands on would be like from the CIA community, or the intelligence gathering community, of what your enemy was up to. And then you could sort of then try to figure out, as a scientist, ways to engineer or create solutions to mitigate what they're working on. So there's this, being a part of the Cold War arms race was really interesting, whether that be, state-sponsored entities or terrorist organizations. So it was really cool to be, in that loop at least. But you can talk about it except with your coworkers, right? And even then, you can't always talk about your coworkers, because they try to keep it compartmentalized so that they can find leaks and information. So sometimes you can't even talk to your coworkers about what you're up to, and that's just the nature of the beast. So it can be really isolating at times.
I got to tell you this: I could be the best scientist in the world, I would struggle to have that position, man, because I enjoy talking way too damn much. So quick sidebar, for whatever that's worth, everyone that listens to the show knows that. So back to your story, so I don't monopolize this, but this is interesting. Man, because I feel like we're getting to the juice here.
Yeah. So it got to a point where I got sick of like having to go through this process. And I was very much of the opinion a lot of the work that I was doing should be made publicly available, just because the problems I was working on could really potentially save or protect a lot of lives. And it was really low hanging fruit. I mean, they have, there's this process of classification, which is called classifications with compilation, which means, you can go Google a piece of information and find it. But then it becomes classified by compiling a million different things that you Google or you analyze, and you start to put all this information together. And that's how they have this thing called classifications or compilation. So a lot of my work was starting to fall into that area because it was new. And I'm like, we should just really be telling this to these people so they can do something to mitigate the threat, so we can protect, Americans. And I won a lot of these battles, but I was getting into these fights on an increasing basis. And with my work being classified and the other programs I was getting pulled into that I wasn't so interested in, I decided to go elsewhere. So, I began the job hunt, and I'm not kidding. I think the second or third thing that I was searched for, I found a data. The title of the position was Director of Data and Analytics at an organization called EcoHealth Alliance, which is a super controversial organization now, which I can get to in a second. But I applied to it. I flew out there. I interviewed with Dr. Peter Daszak, Dr. Billy Koresh, Dr. Who else was there at the time? Kevin Olival. I think were the people that were at my interview. I had to give a presentation. Really rang me through the ringer on statistics, data analytics, scientific method, process, epidemiology, infectious disease stuff that I'm supposed to be an expert in.
Yep.
And I crushed the interview, and they called me up a couple of days later and offered me the position. Got the heck out of New Mexico, moved to New York City, took this job at EcoHealth Alliance. So I'm not sure how familiar you or your audience is with EcoHealth Alliance, but this is the organization which has been the pass-through organization for funding to the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. So this is where it's theorized that that COVID-19 might have escaped from the laboratory, or they do know that there was an outbreak of COVID-19 in the community at Wuhan, and there's a big debate right now whether or not that was through natural occurring emergence or through a laboratory escape. I don't think it's been proven either way. But so my boss then, or my former boss, Dr. Peter Daszak, is on the WHO committee that investigated whether or not that was a naturally occurring outbreak. So I'm tied into all that network of people. It's sort of a small world. So I've been working there, doing cool things. I was actually developing technologies called biosurveillance systems and doing data analytics, mainly for the Department of Defense. Was sort of my niche at EcoHealth Alliance. I got promoted within a year. I secured a bunch of Department of Defense funding, was super successful. And about 2.5, 3 years in, I started having ideas about how we could expand my division of the company, how it could bring more value back into EcoHealth Alliance. And my boss was just not interested in it all, Dr. Daszak. So I sort of saw the writing on the wall. I left the organization and went into academia. But the cool thing is I met my business partner there, who I hired as my director of engineering. His name is Brock Arnold. We became great friends. And that's sort of how the company was starting to be formulated that I work at today. So fast forward a little bit. I know this is a long story, background story.
No, this is great, man.
I went from EcoHealth Alliance to Michigan State University. So my wife is a scientist as well. Her name's Dr. Andrew Huff, and she's a forestry professor. And she was sick of living on the East Coast, and I was sick of being in New York. I'm like, you start applying for jobs and I'll follow you wherever you go. So she was offered a position at Michigan State University. And then I had to show up and say, well, hey, I'm the guy that's tagging along here. Can I work here too? And this happens in academia quite a bit. So I had to interview in the computer science department, the geography department, the human medicine department, the veterinary medicine department, because, academia is sort of a strange place in that everyone is very niche and siloed. And I had a very diverse and broad work experience. So I could have been sort of plugged into any one of these departments and had a home. So I interviewed at all the different departments. 3 of them offered me positions. It was the most grueling interview process I'd ever been through, because I was going through academic interviews week after week after week, and I did that for about a month. I was exhausted. Anyways,
no bueno.
I got the job. I actually took a position in the Department of Veterinary Medicine just because they offered me the most pay. It didn't really matter in the university where I sat. So I was working there, and then another opportunity came up to be what's called the hospital epidemiologist. So I had to start doing infection control plans, environmental health, and all those kind of things in the clinics at the school. So I got involved with all sorts of different things. I was liking it, but I became more and more drawn to the company that we started called MTRX. And we started working on a lot of advanced technologies. We had some pilot projects that we were working on with PepsiCo, large, huge deal. So, I mean, if we could have got them to invest into the technology that we were sort of piloting back then, it was almost $1 billion global deal for the technology that we were developing. We wrote the proposals for all this. We developed all the partnership agreements for the different companies we needed to scale it. And then the whole thing blew up. It was really sort of heart crushing. Yeah, so it was sort of just maybe bad timing, but so we had created a technology to improve the security at food processing facilities, which could basically detect the presence of people in an indoor environment, and then sort of predict whether or not those people were threats. So this had a very, very strong security component to it. And we validated the technology. We tested it in 3 other different factories. They're ready to buy. The Trump administration came into power and they deregulated it. And the regulatory need for our product evaporated overnight. So it died. But the cool thing is, that was tough. We had to take a break from the company for about 4 or 5 months, both Brock and I, and a few of the other people that first came on board with us, and, rethink about what we were going to do. And fast forward, we weren't doing anything. We were left a pretty bitter taste in our mouth, that monumental failure. And a friend of mine from Extreme Networks gave me a call after COVID struck, and he said, "Hey, can you guys develop any technology for screening health?" And I said, "Well, give me a week and I'll see what I can come up with." And it's serious, because there was some other stuff I'd been working on. So I started playing around with this technology back in the years help. This was in 2016 or 17 when I was at Michigan State University, with using energy, millimeter waves, which is the same thing as a TSA body scanner. You go stand up, put your arms, it scans your body.
Yep.
using similar technology to measure your heart rate, your respiration, to do volume calculations. So instead of using it for a security application, you can use that same technology for health application. So I started testing it on cattle, actually, because cattle are big animals. They go through a chute. It's very controlled from a scientific perspective. And we got to work on cattle. So then we started playing around, like, hey, can we mount this on a drone and fly us over crowd and then try to pick up heart rate and these different signals, these life signals off people, physiology signals? We could. So we had all this experimental data. We've been playing with it. So when my friend from Extreme Networks called me up and said, hey, I've got this new position. I'm working in healthcare. Maybe we can get your company going again. I went back to him with the prototype for this technology, what we call the MTRX K1, which is a physiology scanning device, which, at its most simplest form, measures very precisely 450,000 measurements per second of your heart rate, your respiration, your breathing, and also your temperature, like a multi-surface point scan, to then make a prediction whether or not you're healthy or not. And that then, can hopefully help people then filter through, help businesses, help companies, help the government, help schools, help keep COVID out of their environment. And also, the cool thing about it is that it gives people a reassurance and a confidence. So I think, we can get into the weeds of COVID too, but I think the biggest problem facing people right now is getting back to having the confidence or having the reassurance that it's okay to get back to normal life. On a sidebar, so when I was thinking about COVID back in March of 2020 or February, the epidemiologists and public health community thought this thing had what's called a case fatality rate of, 3 or 4%. The data out of China, the data that was coming out of the United States, that's a huge number. Can you imagine every 100 people that got sick, 3 dropped dead?
Yeah.
Well, fast forward today, and it's actually the number somewhere around 0.003%. I might be off on that, 0.003. So it's a very tiny fraction of people with COVID die. So I think what happened was that there's this massive fear perception that came out initially about the disease, which was warranted, which was data-based. That got in the echo chamber in the media, that got amplified. And then what happened over the course of the year is that, the populations that COVID got into and infected changed. It spread into a wider base of the population, not so many of these vulnerable populations, and those numbers dropped. So now the question is, well, how do we get people not to be scared of this? Now, am I going to say COVID-19 is not a bad disease? All diseases are bad. There's a lot of infectious diseases out there that we should be concerned with. Now, is it enough where we need to shut down society for the rest of the world and not have contact with each other? I can just point to couple objective data points. If you compare Florida, Texas, and California with each other, they all had pretty much the same outcome in terms of the case fatality rate, the number of cases. They trend the same. And people will argue, well, hey, those are different places. I'm like, well, yes, they are different places, but they're very large populous places. They're very diverse places. So I think they're comparable. And I think we're going to see more and more of those arguments coming out. We've seen it in Europe too. Everyone was really hard on Sweden right away for the amount of cases that they had. Because they took a very controversial approach where they were like, we're not going to, close everything down. Well, looking in retrospect now, their numbers really don't look different than anyone else's in Europe. So that's science.
Yeah, and I think that there's a time span, right, that we have to give in order to see the data sets and its completion, and it's been very sort of fragmented in the way that this is all unraveled. But it's been an incredible experience as a human. I think that there's it exposed a lot of things that were maybe we were perpetuating as a society, that hey, there's room for evolvement or an improvement, right? And so what's interesting about MTRX is MTRX was you had this journey and sort of vision in a more niche application well before a global pandemic, right? I don't think either of us could have imagined like this is where it would come from. So now that you have this amazing technology, are you seeing that adoption rates are higher now because the mindset is more developed and open to this? Or what are you guys seeing as MTRX is coming on the market right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's changing, and it's been really interesting. So, I'm the CEO. I have different kinds of conversations than my sales team, for example, or my marketers, other people in the company. So, looking back, I have been speaking with a lot of investors, a lot of people in banking, finance, a lot of people in other leadership roles at big companies. And it's been shifting. So the goalpost is shifting. So if you go back to I'd say September or October of last year, maybe this had to do with the election in the United States, COVID's going to go away. Everyone was telling me, well, COVID's going to go away. And, I'd put my Dr. Huff hat on and said, well, these are the facts. COVID's not going to go away. It's probably around for another 2 years. And, I've always had this, I guess I have this reputation of being brutally honest in science. And I've carried that with me my whole life. And I tell people the facts of what I think it's really going to be. And I support that with evidence. And, a lot of times that's unpopular, whatever. People don't like people who talk the truth about things, and people like to be bullshitted. Well, I'm not that person. I'll tell you the underlying flaws in even our own technology and that kind of stuff. It's how you get better. It's how you improve. So those conversations that started shifting into December. Well, by this time, I think, at least the election was being contested, but, I think everyone thought that Biden was going to come into office. And, then the shift was, well, we're going to have vaccines. So vaccines are going to solve all of our problems. So then into January, I'm like, well, we're going to have vaccines, but, this class of virus does something that mutates quickly, and we're going to have variants. And that means that we're going to have to also create vaccines against these variants, and then to simultaneously scale production of these things to get everyone on the planet vaccinated. I go, the ability to do this in a year is just not going to happen. So COVID's not going away this year. And I started saying that back in January. And then come to about, I want to say probably late February, early March, then the conversations changed. I think pandemic fatigue has set in. I think people are sick of it. I think people are seeing that the truth of the data that, very few people die from this. I'm not saying that's not a terrible disease. Once again, people should try not to get COVID. People should engage in good behaviors. But then, other things came out too, where the data now indicates that it's almost impossible to get infected outdoors on a sunny day, and if you're maintaining at least a reasonable distance from other people. I mean, that's what the data really indicate. There's very few super spreader events, almost none. I'm not gonna say there's none, because there have been a few that have happened outdoors, but it's very rare compared to the amount of events that are actually happening out there. So I think this, a couple things, people are becoming more comfortable with the disease. They're tired with the fatigue. They understand the risk of it. The risk framework in which people are operating is changing. So now I think, where we positioned our company, where we want to give people the confidence to operate safely, that's really striking a note, because part of getting businesses reopened, part of whether you're going to a baseball game, a restaurant, especially the service sector, the hospitality sector, where our business is really growing, they, need to do something to make the customers feel safe. There's always some people out there like, oh, I don't care, I'm not going to wear a mask. But then there's people who are legitimately scared. So part of that is giving them a technology, at least that helps them operate safe and confidently. And looking at other technologies out there, comparing us to diagnostic methods like PCR tests, laboratory-based tests, some of these rapid tests, they're really expensive. And, businesses don't have unlimited, set of funds. They don't have the expertise to operate these things or use these tests correctly. So we really view our technology as synergistic with these other technologies that exist. So our technology looks at the physiology of the person and makes a quick decision whether or not that person's healthy or sick. But it's not there's still false positives and false negatives associated with our device. Just like there's false negatives and false positives with a PCR test or a rapid test. So when you use these things together, they're actually increase your ability to prevent a sick person from getting in. But where the huge value add is for our customers is that our scans cost fraction of a cent, and every time you scan another person, there's more return on the investment or value for the person or company that purchases our product. And then once you zoom back, actually, so once we have enough of these devices out in the environment and in the world, you can then start to analyze the population data to determine when outbreaks are occurring. And that's going to be a huge advance over any technology and any biosurveillance system that exists today.
Wow. Man, this is really impressive stuff. And, I think what's interesting is we think so much, or been conditioned so much to think about this in the reactive state, right? Or we want to prevent someone from coming in. But Andrew, I imagine this has to have a proactive measure as well. Are you guys in gyms or doing anything on like the health side so that we don't have to wait till the last minute when we're actually sick and trying to go into that event?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and as a public health practitioner, I've been grappling this for years. How do you have the most bang for your buck in terms of like a society or a business in terms of trying to prevent disease? So, there's an old saying in public health: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we're big on the, I'm big personally, and our company is on prevention. So, well, how do you prevent? I mean, well, first you have to have people be healthy. So with COVID, this is a fact. People who are healthy, in shape, have a good diet, they're getting outside in the environment, having sun exposure, have less severe COVID, have better COVID outcomes. And that's true of any, disease. I mean, that's good life advice.
Yep.
So where our technology comes into play is that we help, and we can over time help people establish a baseline. And why this is a revolutionary change, and this is another value add of our product to the end consumer. So say that you come in, you get scanned by our device, and then you get the scan by our device every time you go into a gym, or maybe when you go to the drugstore. We can then detect or determine when you're functioning outside of your normal or your baseline. And that's a huge advantage in medicine, because the only time the doctor ever sees you typically is when you're sick. You either go in for routine physicals because you have to, or you're sick and you go to the doctor. So then what does the doctor and the nurse do? They take your measurements like we're taking, and then they compare that to reference data, which is a population distribution. So they always say, well, for example, the average population is 90, or temperature is 98.6. But you as an individual, your normal could be 98.2, could be 97.9. They come up with that number because that's an average number. So that's what they tell people. So every time you're sick, they're always comparing these numbers to the population average. But it's more powerful if you have your own individual measurements over your lifetime, and then you can compare those future measurements back against that. And that's where machine learning, artificial intelligence comes into play, because then we can help determine where someone's outside of spec. So you could go up and you could be going to, machine for 5-10 years. And then also you get scanned by one day and says, hey, go see medical personnel, go get this checked out. We don't know what's wrong, but something's not right here. You're not within your baseline. And that is how we change healthcare into the future. And I think that's why our company is going to have success beyond COVID-19 into the future.
Wow. Man, that's why we host this show. I mean, what you just described is truly remarkable, and it's so neat to hear and get behind the scenes of where we're going, not where we're at right now, and not this notion of I can't wait to get back there, but where we're actually going, and switching and flipping this into a more proactive state and reactive state, and then all the benefits that come along with where we're at as a society right now. Andrew, it's absolutely remarkable what you guys have built over there at MTRX. For everyone listening that wants to get in touch with you, learn more about the company, or sees an application at their place of business, Andrew, where can they find more about MTRX, and how is it spelt first and foremost?
Yeah, so we actually had to change the company name when we reincorporated in Delaware. So it used to be METRIX, but now it's MTRX.io is our website. We also own the MTRX Health domain too. So that's MTRXhealth.com.
Awesome. And are you on social? I mean, is MTRX posting things on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or not yet?
Well, we are to some degree, not so much Twitter. I think Twitter is a sort of a hot mess. Like I don't really understand. Like maybe I'm not good enough with people to understand how to interact on Twitter, so I don't do it personally. We have a communications person that does. I'm on LinkedIn. Our company's on LinkedIn. We're pretty active on that social media platform, because I think it better fits our business demographic and who we're trying to reach. So we're mostly business to business, but with definitely an end value to the end user, who could be any one of us.
Amazing. Well, everyone listening, be sure to get behind the MTRX story. You can also find them at Remarkable Consulting, as we're helping these guys continue to get these machines everywhere, so that we can go ahead and flip the dial to a more proactive society. Andrew Huff, I'm gonna let you take us home. What are you gonna send our listeners off with today?
Oh man, I don't know what to say. I need a second to think about it. I can't come up with anything that profound that quickly.
It's amazing. You get remarkable content when you just put someone on the spot. So
Well, then if I had to say anything, and this is what I think is most important, is that everyone should have some hope right now about the pandemic, about COVID-19. Humanity has been through this a number of times before. We're going to get through this one just fine. And every day it's looking better in terms of the outcomes for people who catch COVID. Get your vaccines. They call it the clinical trial phase 4 for the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine. I got mine. We have to find ways to get through this. You have to be proactive, but don't be afraid of it. We need to go about our lives and get back to what you're doing.
Amazing. Andrew Huff, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to check back in with you through the journey of metrics. We wish you all the best of luck, and everybody be sure to tune in for our next episode on The Remarkable Show. See ya.